The 17th argument in the series of arguments against the existence of God is entitled Think About Leprechauns. The author makes this argument, why not, he says, treat God like all other objects and devise experiments to detect his presence or absence? He goes on to say, with every other object and phenomenon in our experience, we use the scientific method to determine whether or not it exists. We again have here, as we keep seeing over and over again in these arguments, an appeal to the scientific method to try to resolve this question. And so we should have some type of experimentally verifiable evidence of the existence of God, or else we conclude that God does not exist. In response to this, I would only repeat a couple of things. First of all, in respect to God being subjected to a scientific test, the scientific method itself, as I've pointed out, is based upon assumptions, metaphysical considerations, or philosophical considerations that are not subject to the scientific method itself, but must be assumed by the scientific method. For instance, the validity of our sense experience, the reality of a world that exists independently of our minds, it's not just a projection of our minds, the validity of the laws of logic that govern all of our thought. All of these are principles or assumptions or presuppositions or metaphysical principles that undergird all human thought, but cannot be subjected to a scientific test itself. That's observation number one. Observation number two, there are things that scientists discover that are suggestive of an intelligent cause or source of the existence of our world. The sort of classical cosmological reasoning that sees the world of motion about us as a world requiring an ultimate mover or an ultimate source of its becoming or changingness, which has been supported, I think, in recent times by Big Bang cosmology, that sees that time and space seem to have had an origin somewhere around 15 billion years ago or so. Time and space itself seem to have an origin at a point where time and space and energy and matter come to expand in all different directions as a result of some event that seems to be what scientists call, or cosmological theorists call, a Big Bang singularity or a cosmological singularity, meaning by that an event that is absolutely unique and about which we cannot move beyond it through the scientific method. In other words, the scientific method presupposes the world of science that we discover and that we think about. The Big Bang speaks about an event, a kind of event, that we could never reproduce, or we could never sort of get back behind it to reproduce the conditions that produced it. And therefore the scientific method is incapable of reaching back behind the Big Bang and determining what its cause or what its source was. This is a philosophical and a theological question. But the most reasonable answer to this question is that some power of enormous power, of enormous energy or ability to bring about an effect, brought this world into existence. And we could think philosophically about that, and even theologically about what kind of cause or source that must be. But the point that I'm making is that that event is not the sort of thing that you can set up in a scientific experiment and determine its causes or the reasons for it. Theorists talk about the conditions of the Big Bang, and they reach back to a certain point and then say that at this point all of the laws of physics break down, all of our concepts break down, and therefore at that point it becomes incredibly speculative and theoretical and incapable of being subjected to a kind of scientific test to determine whether or not it's true. There's a whole lot more that should be said about science and the methods of science and their limits. For instance, science has a very difficult time, I think, trying to deal with things like explaining the human experience of freedom or the human experience of love and the deeper sorts of aspects of human experience like morality, the desire to believe in God. All of these are things that the scientist can sort of discover maybe physical conditions that accompany these beliefs or these drives that exist in us as human beings. But their scientific analysis of it certainly doesn't capture the whole. Human experience is bigger, it's more expansive, it's deeper than what the scientific method can give us. As wonderful as the method is, it is a limited one. And if we try to reduce everything to that method, I think life becomes profoundly impoverished and profoundly shallow.